The following scenario is hypothetical and presented for educational and entertainment purposes. At first glance, it sounds like one of those harmless space trivia facts you'd casually drop into conversation. Astronauts grow taller in orbit. A few centimeters, nothing dramatic. But the moment you stop and ask why, the entire thing begins to feel less like trivia and more like a quiet crack in the rules of reality. Because if your body can stretch simply by leaving Earth, what else about you isn't as fixed as you thought? Here's where the investigation begins. On Earth, you are under constant compression. Not metaphorically, physically. Gravity is always pulling you downward, pressing your body like an invisible hand that never lifts. Your spine, that elegant column of vertebrae and intervertebral discs, is not a rigid rod. It is a dynamic, slightly squishy structure. Each disc is like a tiny cushion filled with fluid, designed to absorb shock and allow flexibility. But under Earth's gravity, these cushions are perpetually compressed, like springs that never quite get to relax. Now imagine removing that force. In orbit, astronauts are not escaping gravity entirely. That's a common misconception. They are in free fall, continuously falling around Earth rather than into it. The result is microgravity, a condition where the compressive force on the body is dramatically reduced. And the spine, finally freed from its lifelong burden, begins to decompress. The intervertebral discs absorb fluid more freely. They expand. The tiny spaces between vertebrae widen. It's subtle, almost polite, but across the entire spine, it adds up. 2, sometimes even 5 centimeters of additional height. A quiet elongation, as if the body is taking its first full breath after a lifetime underwater. But here's where things start to feel strange. This growth isn't just a passive effect. Astronauts often report a sensation of tightness in their backs, even mild pain. Muscles that once worked constantly to support posture suddenly find themselves unemployed. The spine, without its usual load, shifts into a new equilibrium, one it was never really designed to maintain for long periods. The human body, it turns out, is optimized for Earth. Take away gravity, and it begins to renegotiate its own architecture. And that raises a peculiar question. If gravity has been quietly shaping our bodies every second of our lives, then how much of what we consider normal is actually just adaptation? Because in space, the rules don't just bend your spine. They begin to rewrite the very idea of what a human body is supposed to be. And the spine, that's only the first clue. Once you realize the spine is quietly reshaping itself in orbit, it becomes difficult to stop there. Because if one part of the body responds so dramatically to the absence of gravity, logic suggests the rest of the body isn't just sitting still, politely ignoring the situation. And it isn't. The spine's elongation is simply the most visible symptom of a much larger negotiation happening inside the human body, a negotiation with a force it has relied on for millions of years without ever thinking about it. Gravity on Earth is not just a background condition. It is a constant instruction. It tells fluids where to go, muscles when to work, bones how strong they need to be. Remove that instruction, and the body doesn't celebrate freedom. It hesitates. Consider fluids. On Earth, gravity pulls blood and other bodily fluids downward, creating a gradient. Your heart works against this gradient, pumping blood upward toward your brain. Your legs, meanwhile, act as reservoirs, quietly holding a significant portion of your circulating volume. It's a delicate, well-tuned distribution system. But in microgravity, that system loses its reference point. Fluids begin to drift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but persistently. Blood that would normally pool in the lower body redistributes toward the chest and head. Astronauts often describe this as feeling like a constant head cold. Their faces appear slightly puffier while their legs become thinner, a phenomenon sometimes nicknamed bird legs. It sounds amusing, almost cartoonish, until you realize what it implies. The body is no longer sure where anything belongs. And this fluid shift has consequences that ripple outward. The spine, now less compressed, lengthens. But at the same time, the increased fluid volume around the upper body can subtly alter pressure dynamics near the spinal column. The discs expand not just because gravity is gone, but because the entire internal environment is being rebalanced. It's not a single mechanism, it's a cascade. Even the way astronauts stand, or rather float, changes how their spines behave. Without gravity pulling them into an upright posture, the body naturally adopts a slightly curled position, sometimes called the neutral body posture. Knees bend slightly, arms float forward, and the spine takes on a gentler curve. It's a posture no one practices on Earth, yet in space it emerges spontaneously, as if the body has been waiting its entire existence to try it. That's when the investigation takes a sharper turn. Because if the spine lengthens, fluids redistribute, and posture redefines itself, then what we're witnessing isn't just a temporary stretch. It's the body revealing an alternate configuration, a version of itself that only exists when gravity loosens its grip. And here's the unsettling part. When astronauts return to Earth, they don't stay taller. Gravity reasserts itself. The discs compress again. Height returns to baseline. It's as if Earth quietly says, "That was interesting. Now come back to reality." But something doesn't quite add up. If the body can expand in space and compress on Earth, then which version is the true one? The compressed form we live with every day, or the elongated form that appears when gravity steps aside? And if gravity has been subtly shaping not just our height, but our entire physiology, then perhaps the real mystery isn't why astronauts grow taller. It's what else about us has been quietly held down all this time, waiting for the chance to unfold. By this point, the spine no longer feels like an isolated curiosity. It feels like evidence. Evidence that the human body is not a fixed design, but a conditional one. Something that changes its rules depending on the environment it finds itself in. And once you accept that, the investigation deepens in a way that's both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Because the spine is only the beginning of a structural story. Bones, for instance, behave in a way that seems almost philosophical. On Earth, they are constantly reinforced by gravity. Every step you take, every time your muscles pull against them, your bones receive a signal. Stay strong, stay dense, you are needed. This is called mechanical loading, and it's one of the primary reasons your skeleton maintains its integrity. Remove that signal and the bones begin to reconsider their purpose. In microgravity, astronauts can lose bone density at a rate that would alarm any physician on Earth, up to about 1–2% per month in certain areas. It's as if the body is quietly saying, why maintain all this structure if no one is using it? Calcium leaches out of the bones and enters the bloodstream, eventually being excreted. The skeleton, once a proud architectural framework, begins to economize. Now pair that with a lengthening spine. You have a structure that is simultaneously stretching and weakening. A contradiction that feels almost like a design flaw, except it isn't. It's adaptation. The body is optimizing for a world where weight no longer exists in the way it once did. Strength becomes less critical. Flexibility, redistribution, and energy efficiency take precedence. And then there are the muscles. On Earth, your back muscles are constantly engaged, even when you think you're resting. They are the silent workers keeping you upright, counteracting gravity's relentless pull. But in space, these muscles are suddenly off duty. Without resistance, they begin to atrophy. The spine, now longer and less supported, exists in a kind of temporary freedom. Liberated, yes, but also slightly vulnerable. This is where things start to feel less like a curiosity and more like a trade-off. Astronauts often report back discomfort during the early days of a mission. It's not just the discs expanding, it's the entire support system recalibrating. Imagine a bridge whose cables suddenly go slack. The structure doesn't collapse, but it behaves differently. Subtly, uneasily. And yet, despite all of this, the body doesn't panic, it adapts. Exercise regimens are carefully designed to simulate mechanical loading. Resistance machines, harnesses, treadmills that pull astronauts toward a surface to mimic weight. It's an attempt to trick the body into believing gravity still exists. Because without that illusion, the body continues drifting toward a new equilibrium, one that may not be entirely compatible with a return to Earth. And here comes the first real climax of the investigation. The human body in space is not broken. It is evolving in real time, not in the grand generational sense we usually associate with evolution, but in a rapid, reversible, physiological sense. Give it a different set of physical laws, or at least a different experience of those laws, and it begins to rewrite itself accordingly. Taller, yes, but also lighter, less dense, redistributed, rebalanced, a different version of human. Which leads to a question that feels both scientific and strangely existential. If we were born in space, if generations lived without ever experiencing Earth's gravity, would this elongated, less compressed, differently structured body become the new normal? Would tall stop being a temporary condition and start being the default? Because if that's true, then astronauts growing taller isn't just a quirky side effect of microgravity. It's a glimpse into a future where the definition of a human body might no longer be anchored to Earth at all. And the spine, the humble, stretching spine, might just be the first sign that we were never as fixed as we believed. And this is where the investigation stops being comfortable. Because up until now, everything could be explained as adaptation, fluid shifts, spinal decompression, bone density loss, logical consequences of a body encountering a new environment. But if you follow that logic to its endpoint, you arrive somewhere far more unsettling than a few extra centimeters of height. You arrive at the possibility that the human body is not a single design, but a range of designs, each unlocked by different physical conditions. Imagine a child born and raised entirely in microgravity. No lifelong compression shaping the spine. No constant mechanical loading forcing bones to thicken. No downward pull organizing fluids into neat hierarchies. From the very beginning, their body would calibrate itself differently. Their spine might never compress the way ours does. Not temporarily elongated, but naturally extended. Their posture wouldn't be something learned. It would emerge directly from a gravity-free baseline. Their bones might be lighter, their muscles configured for precision rather than resistance. Even their cardiovascular system would likely develop with a completely different understanding of up and down, because those directions would have no consistent meaning. In other words, they wouldn't just be taller. They would be proportioned differently. Built for a world where falling doesn't exist. Now bring that individual to Earth. Suddenly, gravity becomes an overwhelming force rather than a silent partner. Their elongated spine would compress for the first time in its existence. Their bones, never trained to resist sustained load, would struggle. Muscles would fatigue rapidly. Even circulation could become a challenge. What we experience as normal would feel like a constant, exhausting pressure, like living under a weight that never lifts. And here lies the second climax, the one that quietly reframes everything. Astronauts don't grow taller because space is doing something unnatural to them. They grow taller because space is removing something that has been quietly constraining them all along. Gravity, the force we rarely question, is not just holding us to the ground. It is shaping our anatomy, compressing our height, dictating our structure, and defining the limits of our physical form. What we call normal human proportions are, in a very real sense, Earth-specific settings. Turn those settings off and the body reveals a different configuration, one that feels alien, yet is entirely natural under a different set of conditions. And suddenly that small detail, 2 to 5 centimeters of extra height, starts to feel like a message rather than a measurement. Because it suggests that the human body is not a finished product. It is a negotiation between biology and physics, a flexible blueprint that responds to the rules of its environment. Change the rules and the blueprint redraws itself. So the next time you hear that astronauts grow taller in space, it might be tempting to file it away as an interesting fact. But it isn't just that. It's a quiet demonstration that your body, right now, is being shaped, compressed, organized, defined by forces you cannot see. And if those forces were to change, even slightly, you would change with them in ways that might feel almost unrecognizable. Which leaves one final, lingering question hanging in the silence of orbit. If humanity truly becomes a spacefaring species, living not just in orbit but across environments with different gravitational rules, how many versions of human are waiting to emerge, just beyond the pull of Earth?